Will humans really be back on the moon by 2024?
August 15, 1977, the sound of extraterrestrials was detected for the first time by Big Ear Radio Telescope at the Ohio State University. In year 2014, the Polaris 1 was the first human-built spaceship to use an atomic-powered engine to achieve constant acceleration. The spaceship built in top secret and low Earth orbit is carrying a team of members from the Section 51 on a one-way mission in deep space. The mission is to discover the origin of the mysterious repeating radio signals.
Section 51.
Section 51.
Hi everyone, what's up? I am GH aka DOSGeek back here with you and Section 51. Thank you again to watch this new video. As usual, you can like and share our videos. Please subscribe to the channel if you are new to Section 51. And don't forget to have a look to our Spreadshirt shop. Maybe you will find something you like. And of course, any support or donation is highly appreciated. Your support really helps the channel grow. Everyone, it seems, wants to go to the moon now. In January 2019, Chang'e 4, a Chinese robotic spacecraft including a small rover, became the first ever to land on the far side of the moon. India is aiming to launch Chandrayaan-2 this month, its first attempt to reach the lunar surface. Even a small Israeli non-profit Space IL tried to send a small robotic lander there this year, but it crashed. In the coming decades, boots worn by visitors from these and other nations could add their prints to the lunar dust. China is taking a slow and steady approach and foresees its astronauts' first arrival about a quarter of century in the future. The European Space Agency has put out a concept of an international moon village envisioned for some time around 2050. Russia has also described plans for sending astronauts to the moon by 2030. At last. Also, many doubt it can afford the cost. In the United States, which sent 24 astronauts toward the moon from 1968 to 1972, priorities shift with the whims of Congress and presidents. But NASA in February was suddenly pushed to pick up its pace when Vice President Mike Pence announced the goal of putting Americans on the moon again by 2024, 4 years ahead the previous schedule. The fascination with Earth's celestial companion is not limited to nation-states. A lot of companies has lined up in hopes of winning NASA contracts to deliver experiments and instruments to the moon. For example, Blue Origin, the rocket company started by Jeff Bezos, founder and chief executive of Amazon, is developing a large lander that it hopes to sell to NASA for taking cargo and astronauts to the moon's surface. But what are the chances of this actually happening? There are still a lot of hurdles to overcome before an American stands on the moon again. One of the biggest is the cost. NASA is asking for $1.6 billion in fiscal 2020, but NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine said the total cost of sending humans to the moon by 2024 is likely to be between $20 to $30 billion. It's unclear if Congress will appropriate that money or where it would come from. Democratic lawmakers seem determined not to cut NASA's other science and specific missions to pay for exploration. There is also the question of the outcome of the 2020 election. President Donald Trump has been vocal about his space ambitions, but so far, Democratic nominees have not made space a key talking point. A new administration could change or completely kill the mission to the moon. And what is the point of going to the moon? We have already been there. Mars should be next. Exploration of the moon and Mars shouldn't be thought of as two different endeavors. The moon is a test bed for Mars and lets us test technologies we need. These tests are critical to enable our trip to Mars. Considering all the issues of life support without easy Earth resupply, radiation effects on humans, and many others. And we can eventually use the moon's resources to produce prop for the transit to Mars. Also, as we think about exploration and extending the human neighborhood into the solar system and beyond, it would make sense to use the locations closest to us to learn as much as possible. For example, when teaching the Girl and Boy Scouts about camping, one doesn't typically go to the Grand Canyon on the first camping trip. You learn the skills in camping trips nearer to home. Moreover, NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine recently made the case that investment in NASA pays dividends for life on Earth. He talked specifically about space-based communications, especially the impact they have had on rural parts of the world and how space is increasing crop yields and feeding more people through the use of GPS. According to him, there is also a lot of medical research currently going on the International Space Station, including testing out new drugs in orbit to figure out long-term effects faster. The Gateway space station orbiting around the moon would also likely include some medical science that would improve life on Earth. The high level of radiation the station would be exposed to could make it especially useful for cancer research. But for the moment, we won't be seeing colonies anytime soon. There are lots of problems to solve, including how we protect humans from radiation, how we manage dust, which is a huge problem. It fouls machinery and spacesuits and gets everywhere. And NASA is targeting the south pole of the moon because it appears to have water trapped in regolith, the lunar soil, among other things. Water is most likely to be found in craters that have never seen the sun, where the temperature could be as low as minus 385 degrees Fahrenheit, so we may need nuclear power to warm things up enough to operate equipment here. There is a lot to develop, but the South Pole is definitely a good target from what we know now. Establishing operational zones that can be impinged by other nations around specific strategic areas, particularly in the polar regions, for ice, sunlight, and a particularly large embedded asteroid mass, is a clear strategic goal for both US and China. What China is spending is totally opaque, as their governmental structure doesn't exactly require public accountability. It appears they are on track to be there around early 2030s. They have been slow, careful, and methodical. No one can clearly say if they are neither bold enough nor creative enough to be a threat to the US effort. At the end, what we need to remember from all this is that NASA's efforts to reach the moon by 2024 will depend on whether Congress funds them. Without support from both Republicans and Democrats, the moon program could stumble. The chances of returning to the moon in 2024 are slim if Donald Trump loses the elections in 2020. And even if he wins the election, it will still be difficult to finance. But for the moment, President Trump wants to talk about going to Mars, which of course is the objective. And he understands we need to go to the moon in order to get to Mars. But certainly he prefers talking about Mars because that's what captures the imagination of the American people and of the world. But we still have perhaps as our last hope the Themis and Artemis missions. Launched in 2007, Themis is a 2-year mission consisting of 5 identical probes that is studying the violent, colorful eruptions of auroras. Understanding and predicting space weather is important to describe the environment in which spacecraft and astronauts operate and ensure their safety. Just as hail and tornadoes accompany the most severe thunderstorms, substorms accompany the most intense space storms, those that disrupt communications, cause power line transmission failures, and produce the most penetrating radiation. Themis aims to study substorms to gain insight into the most severe space storms. Substorms occur when the magnetosphere suddenly releases vast amounts of stored solar wind energy. Substorms start from a small region in space but within minutes cover an immense region of the magnetosphere. Different possible triggers have different locations, so the key to solving this mystery is placing spacecraft in various locations in Earth's magnetic field to help find the elusive substorm point of origin. So NASA launched a constellation of 5 satellites to study substorms. The Themis probes line up over North America once every 4 days. Themis means time history of events and macro-scale interactions during substorms, and it was aiming to resolve one of the oldest mysteries in space physics, namely to determine what physical process in near-Earth space initiates the violent eruptions of the aurora that occur during substorms in the Earth's magnetosphere. The probes successfully completed their mission earlier in 2010. And then NASA's Artemis mission, or Acceleration, Reconnection, Turbulence and Electrodynamics of the Moon's Interaction with the Sun, was later made up of 2 probes from Themis mission, P1 and P2. The Artemis mission allowed NASA to repurpose these 2 in-orbit spacecraft to extend their useful science mission, saving tens of millions of taxpayer dollars instead of building and launching new spacecraft. The Artemis program, unveiled by NASA in mid-May 2019, now aims to put astronauts on the lunar surface in 2024 and give us the first female moonwalker. Preparations for Artemis have already begun as NASA gets set for the maiden flight of its Space Launch System (SLS) rocket next year. The giant booster, which is taller than a 30-story building, will blast a new crew capsule dubbed Orion on an uncrewed mission to the moon and back. That should be followed in 2022 by a test with up to 4 astronauts aboard, and after that, the construction of a small space station in orbit around the moon. NASA should be able to dock a lunar lander there in 2024. That same year, 4 astronauts will then fly in the Orion capsule to the station, board the lander and descend to the lunar surface. It's a bold plan and success isn't certain. Here again, Artemis faces a myriad of hurdles, political and budgetary, as well as technological. And then there is the matter of getting it all done by 2024. But after all, and as the Apollo program showed, humans have the ability to make great technical strides in a short period of time if everyone gets behind a mission. So, why not? The lunar landers used in the Apollo missions were built by NASA contractors, but NASA now plans to buy the landers to be used for Artemis from a private company to cut costs. So, this summer, the agency should start receiving design ideas from firms hoping to win the contract, which obviously include traditional aerospace firms like Lockheed Martin, as well as SpaceX and Blue Origin, whose founder Jeff Bezos unveiled the company's Blue Moon lunar lander at a splashy event in May. One thing's certain, NASA will need more money to get the job done. It recently asked the Trump administration for an additional $1.6 billion in extra funding for 2020. But only Congress can authorize those funds, and some legislators have voiced skepticism as the agency rushes to finalize a plan. So, who is willing to bet for a return of the man, or rather a return of a woman, to the moon in 2024? Please let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching. I'll be back really soon. Open your eyes, watch the sky. Live long and prosper.